Good afternoon, everyone. I often feel like I should be introduced as, and now for something completely different, because I'm going to talk to you about something that you may not have thought about, but which is affecting all of you and for which you've all had the experience of today. And talk about touch. And at Immersion Corporation, where I have worked for the last 18 years, all we do is touch. That's all we care about is touch and the value of touch for human-computer interaction. So hopefully I can convince you in the next 30 minutes that touch actually matters and you should care about it, and it's something that is relevant to whatever it is that you're doing. When we think about touch, we think about the user experience first and foremost. So the question that we ask ourselves is, what happens when a user has an experience that has multiple sensory components to it? So everyone is used to having visual experience and audio experience, animation. What happens if you add touch to that experience? What changes about the user? What changes about their nature of their experience? What happens if you take a video and you add touch to it? I'm going to show you a quick example. You can't feel it, but this is an ad campaign that we ran recently for Arby's. It's really hard to see, but whenever the phone is moving, it's a vibration that the user is feeling. This is an Arby's ad, in case you didn't notice. When you add touch technology,
we have the beef.
When you add touch technology to an advertising experience, you're increasing the end user's engagement and their attention around that experience. It's something that people can't really ignore. It's very deep in their brains. And in fact, we ran this campaign with IPG Media Lab and Magna Research. And what we found was that adding touch feedback to an ad campaign increases brand lift, it increases the happiness of subjects, and it increases their likelihood to do something like purchase things. So if you think about advertising or brand advertising, e-commerce, adding touch to it can really make a change in the impact of the campaign. So, but let's back up for a second. Touch is something which is fundamental to all of us, as I said at the beginning. Touch is something which affects the way that you understand and perceive the world. There's a couple of different dimensions to this that I want to dig into here. And this has nothing to do with technology, this is just human. So humans, when you think about climbing a wall, right, as the picture is showing here, you're using the sense of touch to feel, can I make that next rock hold? Can I make that next grip? Is that something within my reach? That's something that is active exploration that's allowing you to understand the world around you. If you grab a flower and that flower is delicate, you can easily crush it. That's something that helps you understand, is that a delicate flower or is it a flower that's like a metallic sculpture, in which case grabbing it will maybe cut your fingers, that kind of thing. From a perspective of interacting with the world, if you can reach out and touch something, it reinforces your belief that that thing actually exists. And of course, that's obvious in the world around us right now. But when you think about a virtual reality experience, as I'll come to in a minute, adding the sense of touch reinforces at a very deep, almost reptilian level, your belief in the reality of that experience that you're having. And that's critically important for creating things like presence. The last thing I want to mention is there's a hedonic component to touch. And hedonic, the term is not that commonly used, but hedonic is it an emotional reaction, essentially, that you're creating? Think about a soft caress versus a punch in the face, right? Those are both haptic experiences that you can have, but they have very different hedonic elements to them. One is aggressive, and one is endearing. And that's a pure touch experience that you can have between humans. So when you introduce technology into the equation, touch, it really enables a new level of interaction and control with digital reality, right? So I have a ton of examples coming up, but touch is really the thing which allows you to ground these digital sort of ephemeral experiences in a belief, in a user's belief that that thing is real and they can really have confidence around their interaction with it. It creates the suspension of disbelief. As I said a minute ago, if you're in a virtual reality and you reach out and touch something, your hand goes right through it, well, a very deep part of your brain is telling you that that thing is not real. If you reach out and touch it and you feel like you're hitting it or blocked or it's a barrier to you, your brain is telling you that that thing is real. And so it reinforces the ability to suspend disbelief, which can create presence. The second thing I want to mention around this is that when you have active engagement with technology, and a great example of this is 360 video. So if you think about a 360 video experience that you're holding on your phone, you're actually moving your body to experience that video. Well, your body, all it knows is that since you were a child, when you turn and look, you see different things. And so by having that motion as part of the experience of a 360 video, again, you're increasing the level of the suspension of disbelief. You're making it more likely that the user is going to believe that that thing is real, that they're actually having a disembodiment of the reality around them. When we think about the nature and the evolution of digital experiences, sort of getting to the topic of today, the singularity, you go way back in history to silent black and white films with the piano playing, all the way up to the sort of aspirational goal of something like a holodeck, where you can step through this door and you're into a completely artificial reality that is a different experience completely from your day-to-day life. Visuals and audio are making rapid advancements towards achieving this kind of goal, right? So head-mounted displays, stereophonic audio, spatialized audio, this is all getting really, really good. But from a tactile experience, from a touch experience perspective, there's still a lot of challenges that remain. If you think about, the picture shown here of the Star Trek guy walking through a grassy field, well, there's many touch experiences associated with that. Plants, ground, hard walls, et cetera. How do you simulate that? How do you create a computer interface that can allow you to generate those kinds of sensations? And when you do actually get to a place where you can marry visuals, audio, and touch experiences in a consistent and high-quality way, in an immersive way, this is the thing, again, that gets to you the sense of presence. And I can't reinforce it enough. If those of you who've tried the Porsche simulator in the other room over there, you have the visuals, you have the audio, you have the rumble in the seat, and you have the force feedback in the steering wheel. If you were to take away the haptic dimension of that, it would be not nearly as fun. I guarantee it. It would be kind of boring, actually. And so that's the thing that even though you're not necessarily paying attention to it or attending to it consciously, it's really creating that level of suspension of disbelief. So what are the opportunities that exist to create these touch experiences? I love this slide because it's shocking. This is a sensory homunculus. This is a model of the human body that scales the different parts of the body based on how much brain matter is attached to processing the sensory signals from that part of your body. So as you can see, your hands are way overrepresented in your brain. This little sensorimotor cortex runs across the middle of your brain. There's a big region there that's attached to your hands, and your lips, and your tongue, and your part of your face. The rest of your body, not so much. And so when we think about trying to create rich tactile experiences, when we're getting to this goal of presence, the obvious place to start is with the hands. That sort of goes without saying. But this is a sort of a neurophysiological demonstration of that. When we think about what is the value of haptic experiences, there's three things that we contemplate. The first one is usability value. So if I was to go into a virtual reality experience and try to go out and do something, and I had no sense of tactility in that environment, I might struggle or become frustrated with my ability to interact. And you can see this if you've ever used a 3D menuing system, or even if you've tried typing on a touch screen without looking at it. This is a situation in which you have no tactile feedback, and it's just a usability issue. How do you make these digital interfaces not frustrating, is basically the short way of saying it. And so by adding tactile feedback to interfaces, it's often possible to create a level of usability that didn't exist before. The next thing above that in terms of value prop is performance. So once I've now gone and added some tactile feedback to enable people to not be frustrated, can I modulate that feedback in a way that will allow them to perform tasks more effectively? So a good example might be if I'm in a virtual reality environment and I'm picking up or moving around a bunch of objects, and the objects have different masses, and I can feel those masses when I pick them up and move them around. That gives me confidence around the low mass items that I can pick them up and move them around easily, and confidence that I should be careful about moving the high mass items around. Similar to touchscreen typing, if I take away the tactile feedback from a touchscreen, I'm now going to be less confident about my interaction with it. Even if I can use it, so a lot of people use iPhones, they're like, I don't need the tactile feedback, I'm just fine. But if you add it in, they use it for a while, then you take it away, there's a level of performance that you'll see, and it's really reflective of their level of confidence around the interaction. And this is a really key point. When you add tactile feedback and people expect it from a usability perspective, it creates confidence in their interaction with that technology. And confidence is really critical to make people satisfied, to increase the hedonic dimension, the positive hedonic elements of that experience. Finally, if you add enough tactile feedback and you do it well, you can get to the sense of presence that I talked about a minute ago. So presence is really, I hate to keep saying the word over and over again, but it's really critical is when you've succeeded in creating an experience when people feel like they have journeyed somewhere else, when they feel like they have left their day-to-day life, and they are now completely engaged or engrossed in whatever it is they're doing. So at Immersion, when we think about haptic technologies that are embodied in the marketplace, there's really 4 categories that we're looking at right now. The first category is mobile and wearable devices. So these are devices that are typically have a vibrating motor in them. Everyone's familiar with it. It's like the vibrating buzz you get when you get an alert or whatever, or the vibrating alert on your wearable. These devices have some level of fidelity, but they can only do so much in terms of tactile feedback. In the case of automotive displays, actually some of the Porsches have this, there's tactile feedback on control surfaces and touch screens. So auto is a great example of why adding touch feedback is important from a usability perspective, is because it can actually reduce driver distraction and increase safety and interaction with those interfaces. The third category that we look at is game consoles. So certainly the Sony PlayStation and the Xbox One platforms, these are devices that I'm sure everyone has seen or tried. These devices have rumble feedback in their controllers, and the purpose of that rumble feedback is to make you feel explosions, road noise from the car, gunshots, etc. And really this is in the context of creating presence for game players by having the tactile feedback in the game controllers be consistent with the audio and the visual experience that they're having. Lastly, virtual reality is a re-emerging category. I think this is the 3rd time in my life that virtual reality has been a thing. In virtual reality, we have Oculus and Vive controllers primarily, which have a more advanced kind of haptic feedback in them that I'll talk about in a second here. So rewinding to the mobile phone, there's many, many opportunities to add meaningful usability and performance value through the sense of touch. A couple of my favorite examples are shown here. The one on the left, this is actually a weather application. And the weather application, when there's a forecast of rain, for example, you hold the phone, the rain forecast comes up, you feel as if it's raining in your phone. It's like a pitter-patter on your hand. Very compelling, very engaging. It's not really a usability issue, it's more of getting to the sort of presence or engagement value. The second one here on the right, this is a pressure use case. So in this case, imagine this is a camera application. I'm holding my camera up on my touchscreen phone. I push lightly on the image to focus on a specific spot. So I want to focus on this plant here. I push lightly. When I push more heavily, I will get a confirmation that there's actually been a shutter and the picture's been taken, and I'll get the click sensation and I'll be good. This is a very compelling way to make a realistic camera, almost classical camera experience, either with the autofocus and the click, with a completely technology-driven, touchscreen-oriented interface. In fact, at Immersion, we've done a tremendous amount of work looking at every possible use case, because that's kind of what we do. And there's a whole bunch that you could do just in mobile phones. And we see some of our customers putting some of these and some of them putting others. But there's examples floating around of all of these different use cases, everything from when you scroll through your date selector and you feel the spinning wheel on the touchscreen, all the way to alerts that depend on who's calling you, kind of thing. So there's lots of high-value use cases in the mobile category. Even better, games. So mobile games. One of my favorite games, Fruit Ninja. There's a haptic version on the market. You can really feel a satisfying haptic effect as you slice through those watermelons and those pineapples. And it's really engaging. And it's a value to that gameplay to make people play longer, to make them be more invested in the game itself. The last thing I want to show you is an example of video, mobile video. So when most people watch a video on their devices, this is the experience they have. I hope everyone can see it. But when you add haptics to the video, it's more like this. Oh. So that's the last ad I'm going to show you in my talk, I promise. There is a whole bunch of these example videos if you want to download this app. It's kind of cool. Get it on the Google Play Store. Something like 35 or 40 different examples that you can get and play around with. Different kinds of cars. But there's also some interesting examples that are not just the obvious ones like cars. Things like, what do you do for a McDonald's ad, right? What do you do for, there's a great Honda ad, which is not motors, it's this guy moving papers, and you can feel the papers as he moves them through the ad. There's a lot of great examples there. I really encourage you to play around with it. It's sort of fun. Not yet available on iPhone, though. Right now on Android only. Okay, so that's mobile. In the case of auto, there's products in the market. As I said, the Porsche has some haptic button panels on the control surfaces there. There's a few touchscreen haptic devices on the market, Cadillac Q being a good example. And the value prop here is usability, right? So in this case, you want drivers, when you replace their buttons and controls on the center stack with a touchscreen, you've now created a layer of potential confusion because that touchscreen has a reconfigurable graphical display that can be anything. And so while you're driving down the road, in the past, you could reach over and be like, I know where my climate control knob is, and I can change the temperature. Well, that may be in a different location, or there may be a button or something that you have to push on it. And so by adding haptic feedback to these kinds of displays, you can give users confirmation that they've actually encountered a control on the touch screen and that it's done something. And so this is great because when you think about things like driver distraction, I think the NTSB has a 2-second limit on control interfaces in cars that require drivers to look away. And so by adding haptics, you can bring that down and get users to a place where they're operating the vehicle more safely. Okay, so in gaming, so going back to console gaming, PC gaming, this is a picture of the rumble motor that you find in the DualShock style controllers that have been available for 15 years already. As I said, these devices are primarily used for weapons, road effects, some kind of ambient effects like distant explosions, earthquakes, this kind of stuff. It's really nice, but it's also very ambient. It's something, it's kind of like the world around you is doing something to you, and you can kind of feel that, like a deep rumble. In VR, the new devices that we see from Oculus and from Vive, they have a completely different technology in them. They use this funny kind of motor called a linear resonant actuator, which is actually able to make very crisp and precise haptic sensations. Something like 10 times faster than the rumble motor that you see in the old style game controllers. With this device, you can actually create rich texture patterns. And these rich textures can be useful for things like if you pick something up and you're sliding it, you can feel the texture of that thing as it slides on a table, or you can feel tapping or other kinds of fine manipulation. These things are great for avatar hands. So in virtual reality, you migrate from an ambient experience that's being sort of unfolding around you to an experience where you can actually go and manipulate and do things with your hands. And these actuators are great for that because they give you that level of fidelity and control in order to simulate the kind of touch experiences that you want to have. Again, to create that sense of presence. Okay, one of my favorite examples, I was talking to someone at lunch about this. There's been work done in the past, if you really want to go to a very high-end professional marketplace. There's been work done in the past on surgical trainers. This is a great example of an integrated haptic experience. For those of you who've ever seen or had laparoscopic surgery, the surgeon actually looks at a screen beside the operating table and operates these controls over here while he's looking over there. And the controls are upside down and backwards. So just think about that when he's cutting out your gallbladder, is they have to learn how to operate these controls upside down and backwards while looking in a different direction. And so there's these trainers that have been created that simulate all of the forces that they are going to experience when they're doing those procedures. So this is a completely virtual simulated surgical operating environment. They can go in, they can cut stuff up, you can simulate different kinds of complications, and then they get all the manual, mechanical, sort of hand muscle memory training that they would get if they were to do that same procedure on an actual live subject. And one of the great things about that is most doctors are learning these things for the first time on a first patient. And there's 15 or so procedures before they're actually any good at it. So you want them to use this if possible, at least initially. So what's the future of this? Well, a long time ago, I did this project where we created this crazy machine that you strap yourself into, and you have two hands, and you can reach around and grab virtual objects and manipulate them. We sold these for $250,000 each. Not very practical. I think we sold like 5. But sort of a vision of where you might go in the future in terms of whole body haptics. More recently, actually in January, some company up in San Luis Obispo closed a Series A round to build this device, which is even more insane. This is a device that you strap yourself into. There's exoskeleton that straps onto your legs and your arms. You're able to run, do jumps. I don't think you can do flips, but I'm not sure. But this is the vision here is how can we create something which is, this is like the full virtual reality vision of the holodeck, right? You get this thing working very well. There's potential for that level of presence and engagement. A more practical and interesting example is this technology here, which is the Void. Some of you may have heard of this. There's one open in New York at the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. There's another one opening soon in Utah. This is kind of like laser tag, but everyone has a virtual reality helmet on, and they have haptically enhanced guns that they can use, and the entire environment is mapped. So the actual environment, it's really hard to see, is just like a plastic wall with a plastic square on it. But when the user has the head-mounted display on, what they see is a computer-enhanced version of that. And the haptic element of this is, it's actually a passive haptic experience. When they go and interact with that virtual touchscreen, they feel the real physical surface. So it's creating that kind of a physical barrier for them to be able to interact in a usable way with that interface. It'll be interesting to try that out when it becomes available. There's a whole bunch of different other places where you could use haptics, and we see it being increasingly possible to do these things as we see more and more devices having haptic feedback available as part of their hardware. Certainly art, entertainment, for sure, we talked about that a little bit. Retail and e-commerce, imagine being able to interact with products on Amazon before you buy them. There's some products for which that kind of interaction is meaningfully useful, and so you could add haptics to those experiences and be able to enhance perhaps the sell-through rate. Training and education. This has been around forever. Military's been using haptics for 2 decades at least to do training and simulation activities. There's a lot of different things you can train. You could train mechanics on how to repair motors and so on. One of the best stories I heard in this space is Lockheed was building the F-22, and they needed the mechanics to be able to lay on their back on an aircraft carrier and take out some engine component, and it turned out that they couldn't reach properly in the CAD model, and so they had to change the way the plane was designed to enable that kind of interaction. This is a value you get from being able to do virtual interaction with CAD models early in the process. Simulated life, we talked about that a little bit this morning, and Kevin talked about the next social reality that we're going to see. Certainly when you get to a place where you have things like like Mark Zuckerberg's vision of virtual reality and Facebook merged, the idea of the sense of touch is meaningful from a hedonic perspective, right? You want to be able to give a caress. You may not want to be able to punch someone in the face, but you want to be able to give a caress or give other meaningful touch interactions in these social constructs. Product design, shared physical virtual experiences. I think the last one is probably one of the most interesting, is the ability to use touch in an augmented reality environment. Now you're talking about mixing physical experiences with manufactured haptic experiences and perhaps overlaying them on top of each other. So you could imagine a real object that you can put a fake texture on top of and manipulate that texture in a way that's meaningful for user interaction. Okay, so what's the way that we get there? So for a long, long time in haptics, it's been primarily engineers creating these devices and then trying to create experiences on top of them. Engineers are great. I love working with them. It's all wonderful. The challenge is that usually the experience that you're trying to get to is a creative vision. Some creative person has a vision of a complete experience that they want to generate for the users, for their audience, etc. And so what we really want to get to is a place where there's a creative suite or some creative tool chain that incorporates haptics in a fundamental way. So that people who are using Adobe Creative Cloud, they open the haptic tool chain or whatever it is, and are able to create haptic experiences in conjunction with the visual and the audio experiences. Because that's the only way you can really get to a place where you have this sense of presence. Because all 3 modalities have to be aligned and well created. Okay, second last slide. So Immersion, this is the company I work for. Immersion only does touch feedback technology, founded in 1993. We have something like 2,400 issued or pending patents around haptics or haptic technology. If you or one of your customers or clients is thinking about using haptics, the first call should be to us because we probably know something about it or know how to do it or know what you need to do or can help make it happen. We've literally done it for every touch interface you can imagine. We've had some hand in it somehow. A lot of big name companies using this right now. Exciting activity on the ad front. You should expect to see a lot of that in the coming year or 2. And as you see more and more traction with virtual reality devices, again, there'll be more and more value creation around tactile feedback in these VR experiences. And I'll just leave you with this final slide, and I'll take any questions if there's any.